All right, it seems we are live. A very warm welcome to everyone who's joining this live webcast on data protection, a very exciting competition which is very much at the heart of the European project of the European Union and very high on the political agenda these days. So my name is Andras Banet. Hi, we'll probably keep the video feed on for the length of the webinar. And please, why don't you type into the chat box, as we always do, where you are dialing in from. We are gonna see how far and wide the reach of this webinar spreads. There are some fellow listeners in Brussels, but I can see that there are others from Rotterdam, from Poland, Czech to all our Polish friends, Luxembourg, Greece, Alicante, Croatia. Excellent. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining. And well, with the caveat that I'm broadcasting it from home, my kids have to be in quarantine, so hopefully they will behave properly, but there is always this risk of having some background noise. In any case, let's get started. And very happy you already tried the chat box. You are more than welcome, and you are encouraged to use that to put any question there, which I'll do my best to answer. If there is something that I cannot give the answer immediately, I'll make sure to follow up, or with our team, we'll get back to you in one way or another, in one shape or form. So in the background, you have Lenka and Veronica, who were kind enough to dedicate their time to ensure that this webinar runs very smoothly and making sure that all the technology is on our side. If there is any technical hiccup, then please restart your browser or use a different browser, or in an extreme case, you might want to use a different device, but that usually fixes 99% of the audio or video problems. So that should be pretty straightforward. And then regarding my background, don't want to spend too much time on that. You might know me from the very website you registered on EU training, and the book, the Ultimate EU Test Book, which has been in print for almost 15 years now. Is that even possible? Yeah, it's almost 15 years, 14 years actually, since 2006 or 2007, I believe. In any case, I'll bring that perspective. I'll bring my background as a former EU official and someone who's been following EPSO competitions for many, many years now. I'll bring that experience to you to make sure you understand all the ins and outs of this particular competition. In case you miss anything, you receive this very recording within a day. And well, the full recording, obviously, along with the presentation slides. So the ones that you see on the screen, certainly if you're watching it as a recording, you might still have questions. In that case, feel free to send us a message through the eutraining.eu website, the contact form, and one of us will be happy to follow up and answer your question. But those who are here live right now on the 10th of September, Friday, early afternoon, you are welcome to put your questions into the chat box, which you'll have the benefit of getting an answer to, in hopefully all cases, directly from me at the live event. We'll also do a full transcript, which will be available publicly, which will be on the website. So in case you prefer to read instead of watching the topic, then you are welcome to do that through the transcript. About our company, really in a nutshell, we have a fairly substantial community over the many years we've been in business. Over 100,000 people have registered, and thousands, really several thousands of them are EU officials now. There's a very robust and live and very active Facebook community that you might want to join if you are on Facebook. And then we have really a very, very solid, a massive amount of tests, multiple choice tests and different resources in our database. And incredible, 17 million questions have been used to generate, test, and simulate EPSO competitions. And alongside these tests, we have webinars that you might want to check out. A large number of them are completely free of charge. And really, we've had a lot of viewers over the years. And then towards the very end, I'll be happy to share with you a special exclusive offer, which gives you a discount for all our preparation resources and the packages we have on offer. And more importantly, this is a great milestone. It's a very important day in our company's history, and perhaps for candidates like yourselves, is that as of today, we have verbal reasoning tests in 24 languages. So every single EU official language is now available on our website, including Maltese, including Latvian, including Finnish, including other perhaps less widely spoken languages. All of those are available. So hopefully you'll be happy with the quality. And we want to make sure that this is as democratic as it gets, that no language is left behind when we take the EU's official repertoire of languages. So with that, let's get started and look at the very competition we'll be covering today. So it's EU and EPSO competition, European Personnel Selection Office competition for data protection officials. Maybe a minor note, but still a very important aspect. You might be wondering where you will likely end up working. And the simple answer to that is most likely Brussels, perhaps Luxembourg. I say most likely Brussels, given that the Commission, the European Data Protection Supervisor, the Council of Ministers, most of the institutions that would employ future data protection officials are located in Brussels, but there's also a chance that the place of work would be Luxembourg, depending on the need of the institutions. And here's the full list of potential employers after you have passed the selection competitions. One important point I often mention is the difference between selection and recruitment. What EPSO does is selection. They are the ones who administer the competitions to make sure that they create a so-called reserve list with eligible candidates, at that point already called laureates. So once you are on the reserve list, then the selection part has ended and the recruitment begins. So that is when you can start applying for specific vacancies that the institutions would offer. So in that case, you would send your CV or find out where's a vacancy, which is often published on your EPSO account or in the EPSO profile. There are also other ways to hear about these. We actually have a dedicated webinar on that. So once you get to that point, you are at a different stage in the competition. But what we're focusing on today is really the selection process, so you can end up being placed on this reserve list. And these are the institutions that can eventually hire you. So that is decided at the moment of recruitment, as you may have guessed, because it's not yet known which institution has vacancies or wants to employ a certain number of data protection officials. But they had given indications to EPSO how many people they are altogether looking for. So they have a certain number. It's a fixed number. It's in the notice of competition, the number of places on the reserve list they want to fill up with suitable candidates. Let's look at the application process and what it entails. So this is the number, 76. That's how many places there are. Now, some of you who might be new to EU competitions and EU jobs might wonder whether that's a lot or that's a little. Actually, that's a pretty good number. So some competitions may have only 5 or 10 or 15 places on the reserve list, which really calls for a very fierce competition. This one with 76 places, that's a pretty good number. So chances are actually pretty good, obviously with the caveat that we don't know how many candidates are actually going to apply. So the proportion will be a very important factor, because if you have 76 places and 200 candidates, fantastic. But if you have 76 places and 5,000 candidates, proportions are somewhat different. In any case, this is a fairly substantive number, as I said. And on top of that, one interesting aspect I'd like to highlight is that it's an 86 competition. What does that mean? The starting entry-level grade for administrators, so those with the right qualifications, is 85. And then 86 is one grade up. which typically would take you anything between 3 to 6 years of working as an 85 until you are eligible for promotion to be 86. This competition already hires at an 86 level, which tells us that they are already looking for professionals who have some work experience and they are not necessarily fresh graduates out of university. This is a point I'll come back to because it's part of the eligibility criteria that you need to fulfill. Application deadline, very important, 12th of October. So pretty much a month from now. Make sure you do not leave your application to the last moment, that you are really keen to fill out all the necessary information that is requested of you on your EPSO profile, and that you send it in a day or two before. You don't want to risk if a server crashes, your Wi-Fi doesn't work, or some technical hiccup might prevent you from actually completing the application on time. And this is typically at noon, so on the 12th of October at noon, Brussels time. So if you're located in different time zone, again, don't risk that you might miss it. Are you eligible? This is perhaps the most important question for many of you, because you need to have the right profile and the right experience to be eligible, meaning that you would be considered for the selection tests of this particular competition. So what are the general conditions? Pretty straightforward, nothing surprising there. So you must have EU citizenship. You need to have completed the military service if that's compulsory in your country. I think it's Greece, Austria, perhaps some other countries, but not many in the EU. But again, if you are a citizen of those countries and there's compulsory military service, you need to have completed that, or you need to prove that you're officially exempted. And then you need to meet the character requirements for the job. So if you're a convicted criminal, you probably won't be eligible unless you've done your time in some penitentiary institution, but hopefully that is not the case for any of you. So with that, these are general conditions, again, pretty straightforward. More importantly, you probably want to look very carefully at the language requirements, the language rules. What does it say? So it says that you need to have a language 1, which is any of the EU's 24 official languages. And minimum C1 level, that's always a cryptic metric of what C1 actually means. It pretty much means that you are fluent in that language, both written and spoken fluency. You could call it mother tongue, but I'm a bit wary of calling it mother tongue because some of you may have grown up in a different country. Some of you may have a mother tongue which is not among the EU's 24 official languages. So that is really, that's your menu, your choice of options to pick from the 24 languages, which is probably the language you speak completely fluently. I would give the example, my native Hungarian could be this language. I could choose English if I wanted to, and some other languages I speak. And then language 2, it needs to be English or French, and different from language 1. So again, if I take my own personal example, I probably would choose as language 1 Hungarian, and then English as language 2. But again, given that I speak also French, I could pick language 1 as French, language 2 English, or the other way around. You probably get the idea. The point is that language 2, I encourage you to choose, if you have the liberty to choose from French or English because you speak both well, I would encourage you to choose one in which you can really process information very quickly, but also write very quickly or express yourself with the greatest ease. So again, if I just take my own personal example, I speak fluent French and I write fluently in French, but it's still not at the level as my English. So I feel just more comfortable expressing myself, or perhaps more sophisticated or more at ease in English. So again, I encourage you, if you can choose between these two, you probably want to pick the one where you are truly the most, in which you're truly the most comfortable. So that's the language part. Usually doesn't cause a lot of headache to most candidates because the language 1 would be, again, pretty much a straightforward choice, and then perhaps some dilemma for language 2. But once you're done with that, you want to make sure, as I said, they are different, but you want to make sure that you have the right professional qualifications. So we spoke about the general conditions, the language rules, and then number 3, the qualifications. And this is where it might get a little tricky for some candidates, depending on your background, depending on what professional experience you may have gained or where you studied or what you did until this point. So it's 86. The requirement is that you have a completed university studies at least 3 years attested by diploma. I'm peeking at the screen to make sure that I'm fully accurate. So that essentially means you have a bachelor's degree from an accredited university in Europe. If you got your degree outside, you might need to do a homologation or equivalence, whatever that's called, to make sure that it's acknowledged in Europe. But then again, so it's a basic diploma, if you want to call it that. So usually a BA. Obviously, if you have an MA or you have a PhD, that's not a problem. It's not going to hurt your application chances. It's especially for this kind of competition, this is probably helpful, but the minimum requirement is what you see on the screen. And then an extra requirement is that you need to have professional experience. So that is what makes this competition an 86. If it were an 85, they would not require any professional experience. But given that it's 86, it's you need those 3 years of professional experience, and it has to be related to the field of the competition. Development of data protection policies, or basically working with data protection legal framework. If you have experience maybe as a civil servant, but you never really dealt with data protection, it probably won't qualify you. If you work in a law firm and among the many things you did, data protection and using data protection on a regular basis, there's a chance you will qualify. Or let's say it's likely that you will qualify. So it's always, there's a bit of gray zone there of how relevant your work experience is, how connected that is to the actual competition. And sometimes, like a good lawyer, you need to argue your case that you are actually eligible. Interestingly, they do not require a legal degree here. So as you can see that the underlying degree has to be any degree. So if you have a degree in linguistics, but then for 3 years, at least for 3 years, you worked in a field strictly related to data protection, then you can qualify. So that's an interesting aspect and might be even very helpful to some of you, depending on what your original qualification is. But as long as you have that experience, that is a helpful thing. So I see that there are a couple of questions coming in. I'll just go on, and I know Lenka and Veronica will be kind enough to filter those which require my attention, and I'll peek at my secondary device. If there's a relevant question, I'll try to answer it as we go along. So with this, perhaps I'll say a few words about why this is a great opportunity. Actually, I looked at it. I see that there's one question whether this is so the 3-year experience, does it have to be full-time? Yes, generally that's the way they apply this rule. So you cannot have maybe 6-month experience and then a pause, or you just work part-time but not in a full-time job. Now, if you were a freelancer, in the sense that maybe you were perhaps an individual lawyer or legal counsel or something similar, well, maybe practically you didn't work full time, but as long as you have, again, the right documentation, you can prove it, the kind of work you did, your status was as in that capacity, you worked as a counsel, then practically it's a full-time job. So again, it depends. If you were maybe an employee or a civil servant who worked maybe 4 hours for 3 years, again, I'm not the authority to decide on this, and that's my legal disclaimer that you probably want to check that with the selection board of this particular competition. But then again, it might not fly, All right, I see that there are 2 questions. So before I actually go on to talk about why this is a great opportunity, I'll say a few words to these questions. So there's one question, could a specialized master be recognized as relevant professional experience? At first glance, no. Specialized master, I don't know enough about it, but it's probably it's a qualification, it's a study, and not necessarily an actual experience. I presume you had to do some traineeship, some internship, or some sort of practical side, but simply having that extra qualification and you want to sell that as an actual professional experience, that might be tricky. Here's another one. I'm a legal advisor. Data protection law is part of my tasks, taking about 50% of my time, but can I prove this? Will this be a barrier? Oof. I wonder why you cannot prove this. So I would think that, well, there's probably a declaration of honor, or to say that, well, I'm a legal advisor, and as you say, a big part of my job is dealing with this particular topic. So again, even a declaration of that kind, maybe if you can get anything signed by your employer or client or someone who's not you but works with you, could qualify. So here I would say this is fair enough and likely gonna work. And then if I'm a lawyer with a master degree in the field of GDPR but not having the 3 years of experience, will I still be eligible? I'm afraid no. So that 3 year of actual experience is really necessary. So you might be the greatest scholar on GDPR, but if you do not have that formal requirement of 3 years of experience, then they're not gonna let you qualify for this competition. And again, based on the minimal information I'm getting from these questions. The experience required should only be as data protection officer, or similar, also compliance to data protection rules in another job as a public officer, for example. It's either or. So if I go back for a second, it's what it says that development of data protection policies and or the application of data protection legal framework. So if you qualify for one of these two, then you qualify. So you don't need to have fulfilled both of these task or job profiles. And shall be the 3 years be continuous? That's a good question. Now, as long as you have altogether 3 years, I don't think it needs to be continuous. So if you did 1 year as a data protection officer, perhaps, and then you did a pause for whatever reason, and then you had another 2 years, at least 2 years, in a very similar kind of job, I think that should qualify. Because why? If you went on maternity leave, if you took a sabbatical, if whatever reason you didn't work in that particular profile, that's okay. But as long as you need to have those 3 years of experience, but most probably not continuous 3 years. All right, final question before we move on. What if the experience came before university level, but was still related to the field of competition? That's an interesting one. So it says 3 years of appropriate graduate level professional experience. So I think the graduate level is what refers to having that experience after you've obtained your formal qualification. So again, at first glance, I'm not sure that would fly. But then again, given the circumstances of your case, it might give a different picture. So again, in such gray zone kind of questions, I would encourage you to at least try to contact the selection board or EPSO itself, and they'll convey your message and just say how is this being evaluated. Now, in many cases, they will not pronounce, they will not say anything in this particular case, and they say, well, you need to apply, and then we will decide. So unfortunately, that's what you might need to do, that you actually apply, you fill in everything, and then wait for the invitation, or if they decide that you don't qualify, then they will let you know. So it's not always possible to get their assessment or their take on your particular case before the application deadline. You may need to just try your luck in that sense. But then again, based on what I understand from your question, I would not give you any false hopes. But again, still, you might want to give it a try. All right, so with that, why is this a great opportunity? I probably don't need to convince most of you that this is a great opportunity. As I said early on in my introduction, it's really the time for data protection, right? So now in the age of big tech and tons of privacy issues and data being everywhere and personal data being used and abused left, right, and center, this is very much the time for this kind of profile. So the institutions are very keen on having a profile that you have with data protection background. And certainly there are great opportunities out there. And GDPR was probably just the opening shot in a long effort from the European Union to pay a lot of attention in legal legislative terms to their citizens' privacy concerns. But aside from that, on a very practical career level, it's certainly a great opportunity because the salaries are attractive. We on EU training have a salary calculator. So you might want to check that out, and you can play around depending on your personal circumstances, whether you have children or whether you need to move from a different country, different from the place of employment. Then you are eligible for certain additional salary benefits. But overall, as a ballpark, it's around 5,500 euros net as a monthly starting salary, which is obviously very attractive. And there's a health insurance, very comprehensive one, and European schools, if you have children who can study in their own language or one of the languages of the European Union, depending on your circumstances. Now, you are probably asking yourself, that's all fine and great, but how do I actually get one of these jobs? And here's where it gets tricky, because it's a slightly different competition this time. And I say slightly different because it did surprise us as EU training and the team, that there were a couple of things which we, I wouldn't say did not expect, but we were not used to. And I think this also speaks to EPSO, the Personnel Selection Office, adapting to the changing needs and demands of the European institutions and bodies, but also the expectations and the new reality of that COVID has brought in, of how to test and how to find and how to evaluate the potential future European officials, meaning the candidates. So let's take a look, and those of you who are more familiar with the European careers and the EPSO tests would certainly spot these differences. I'll try to also highlight these, because some exams are not there and others are, which you probably want to pay a lot of attention, because it has a major impact on how you prepare, how are you going to succeed in passing these competitions. So here's one. Application process, you fill in the eligibility declaration, which all of this happens obviously online these days. You pick your language 1 and 2, something we spoke about earlier, and then you submit the application in one of the 24 languages of the EU. For practical purposes, you might want to do that in English, French, or German, but then again, you have full right to submit that in Maltese or Polish or Finnish, given the way the institutions approach language policy. And you validate everything, validate everything by the 12th of October, so in a little over a month from today. Here's where it gets interesting. So you have a pre-selection exam, just like you have in any other EPSO competition, but this one is a field-related exam. So this is pretty new in the sense that there are going to be multiple choice tests at this point, which is not customary, which is not something that other competitions in the past roughly 10 years actually had. So in the pre-selection part already, you have these multiple choice tests, 40 questions that you need to answer in 60 minutes, and it's in language 2. So again, these are multiple choice tests where there's one question and usually 4 options. At least this is what we're expecting, and that's what similar tests typically have. But this is a knowledge-based exam. So it actually wants to test how much you know about the field, but based on the very limited information that that we've seen and EPSO has communicated, it's not entirely or directly testing your knowledge. So they're not going to ask, what does GDPR, the GDPR regulation say, I don't know, paragraph 15 on data breach process. The most likely, or whatever we understand at this point, is that they're going to present you with some scenario, and that's how they ask what is the right answer to that. So if there's a data breach, or somebody gets access, a third party gets unauthorized access to some personally identifiable information on your website, what is the process? What is the next step? Who do you need to notify? Who do you need to alert? So they would present you with some text-based scenario and then ask you what is the legal consequence or the legal process in the context of that particular scenario. So this is what we understand at this point, and we are looking into this very, very carefully and already consulting with experts. Now, this notice of competition came out yesterday, so a little over 12 hours ago. We are looking into this and trying to analyze and gather as much information as we can so we can offer you these kind of sample multiple choice tests, but no promises made at this stage. As I said, we are keen on helping you and providing you with practice questions and sample tests, but even EPSO has not communicated any sample questions yet at this point. So there's very limited information, but as I said, we're mobilizing our sources and resources to gain more information and then being able to provide you with the right preparation. In short, there is a multiple choice test of this kind that you will need to take as long as you are eligible to participate in this competition. So 40 questions, language 2 in 60 minutes, which is a very important part of the overall scores and important part of the overall exam. There's a pass mark, so you need to have at least 20 points, but it's not that important because you need to have as many points as you possibly can. So you really need to get the most points because it's a competition after all, where you are competing with other candidates. So they will do a ranking based on the points you got in this multiple choice test, and they will rank the applicants accordingly, and only a certain number of those who reached a certain point will pass to the next stage. Now, yeah, it's actually pretty much the same information on the screen, so you are fully aware of all the rules. You need to know your stuff. You need to answer correctly as many times as you can to stand a chance of being better than your peers. Now, the score will be added to the final mark in the assessment center. So the concept is the following. This is a pre-selection test where they, as the name suggests, pre-select candidates who can go to the next stage. So you need to be good enough to pass to the next stage. But even among those who pass to the next stage, the score will be kept, and it will be part of the bigger pie of scores that you will get based on other tests that you need to sit in later stages of the process. So there's the next step. So those who pass, and we already know how many people will roughly pass. You see that approximately 3 times the number of people who can be placed on the reserve list, which we know is 76. So you do the maths, it's roughly 220, 230, 240 people. It's not possible to say in advance because it all depends on how well everyone performs on the pre-selection test. So that's why they give a rough number, but if they say this is the cutoff score, there could be, excuse me, there could be an additional number of people, but this is the ballpark figure that they give, how many candidates they're willing to test in the assessment center. So supposing everything goes right, you get to the next stage, and that's when the assessment center actually happens. Now, the tests are done in language 1 and language 2. So again, both languages need to be put to use, And the location could be either online or in person. It all depends on the epidemiological situation in Belgium, in Europe, and generally how easy it is to travel. If you need to travel because it's in person, they reimburse the travel costs and provide you some allocation for accommodation. Again, in the name of equal opportunities, this should not be a problem for anyone. But then again, the exam might happen online, as it has happened in the past year and a half or 2 years, given the restrictions. So they also have tools and systems in place for that. In the assessment center, there are actually two major parts. So one part is the actual assessment center, in the sense that there's a case study exam, and then there's an SCBI, a situational competency-based interview. We have a lot of resources for both: webinars, articles, ebooks, tips and tricks. You have it all. So all of this, you can find out more on EU training. You can get access to all these resources. So I will not spend any particular time on this. I know that there are a couple of questions coming in, but again, just for the sake of completeness, to mention there's two types of tests. One is a case study exam where you need to write, and then there's a situational competency-based interview, which, as the name suggests, is an interview face-to-face or online with an assessor or two assessors, and they ask you questions based on a background document, and you need to answer those the best you can. All of this happens in language 2. Yeah, so all of this happens in English or French, pretty much it, and quite straightforward. Then there's also a field-related interview. So there they would ask you questions very specifically about data protection, things which are immediately closely related to the field of your competition. And then, yeah, it's about the scoring before I move on to the next one. But so the scoring here, this is pretty classic. So the assessment center essentially assesses your competencies. So there are 8 competencies which are always the same in every competition. These are the ones that the assessors will evaluate. So like communication skills, working with others, resilience, leadership, and I'm just blanking on the rest, but anyways, there are the 8. All of this is public information, organizing and prioritizing, et cetera, et cetera. These are the competencies that are fully public. Of course, there's much more to it. So we provided a lot of resources as to how to evaluate, self-evaluate, so how to assess your own existing level, how you can improve these and demonstrate these in the framework of these particular exams. So having said that, there's a pass mark because each of these 8 competencies would be worth maximum 10 points. So that can add up to 80, and you need to have at least 40 to pass. But then there's also your professional knowledge, your competencies in the field. So the field-related interview is weighed with a very importantly in the overall scoring, where you need to have 70 points at least out of 140. I mean, that's a lot of points. You can see the proportions that you can be a great communicator, you can deliver quality and results, you can be very resilient with great leadership skills, fine. But if you don't know much about this particular topic, you probably won't be a very effective data protection officer. And vice versa. If you have an outstanding knowledge about data protection, but you are an antisocial and unbearable person to work with, well, again, that's not going to yield enough score to pass this particular part of the competition. Now, interestingly, in addition to this, there is another exam, our good old multiple choice psychometric tests. So abstract, verbal, and numerical reasoning tests. So let me try to sum it up where we are right now. So there was the pre-selection part where you take a multiple choice test with questions linked to data protection as we know it right now, based on some scenarios, how you would apply the data protection laws and rules. So what is the right course of action in the context of the situations they describe, with 40 questions and 60 minutes, and you need to do your very best. If you are among the highest scoring candidates in that particular pre-selection exam, you get to the assessment center. In the assessment center, you have some kind of tests, case study, situational competency-based interview, field-related interview. And on top of that, you have a computer-based test, multiple choice test, abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning tests, which are the classic kind of tests. So you see that it's interesting in this particular competition where they have the verbal, abstract, numerical reasoning as part of the assessment center and not as a pre-selection test, as they often do for other competitions. We'll see whether that's the new way of running such competitions, or is it an outlier for some reason that they're just testing and seeing how well that works. But in any case, once you are in that phase, you really need to be at the top of your game, because your score in the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning will be also added to the overall score of the assessment center. So you have those competency scores, you have your field-related interview score, and you have the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning score. So you need to have very high points in all three major tenets or pillars in order to have an overall high score and then ideally be placed on the reserve list as a laureate. So hopefully that makes sense. A few words about abstract numerical reasoning. Many of you would presumably know this or had experience with this, that you have, so for verbal reasoning, you have 20 questions in 35 minutes, which is relatively short, less than 2 minutes per question, where there's a text and you need to find the statement that's the most accurate in the context of that text. Then there's a numerical reasoning, which is 10 questions in 20 minutes. So here you have 2 minutes per question, where you need to look at a chart or some numbers and just come up with the right calculation, or at least estimation, which helps you identify the correct answer, again, in the context of that particular exercise. And then you have the most dreaded one, which is the abstract reasoning, where you have 10 questions and 10 minutes, is you need to find the next element or item in the sequence of abstract charts that has a certain logic to it, how the different pieces move or turn or spin or appear or disappear. And then you need to find the next one in the sequence very, very quickly. So interesting thing that we call this CBT, the computer-based test, so the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning test, the scoring, it doesn't have a pass mark. So it's not that you need to be amazing in all three, but you're encouraged to be very good in all three, because the point will be added to your overall score, as we said before. So 20, 10, 10, so altogether 40 points, and you want to get the maximum. This is the idea. We'll see how that works in practice and the scoring. So just to sum it up, you have these competencies, you have the field-related interview, and then you have the CBT, the computer-based tests, the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning tests. And those having the highest marks will be ranked, and the best 76, presumably 76, give or take 1 or 2, depending on where they do the cutoff point, will be on the reserve list, eligible to be data protection officers in the end. And then we also put here the pre-selection, where there's a pass mark, but then again, it's just not enough. You need to be among the best. And once you're on the reserve list, as I said before, that's when you become eligible for recruitment. So that's when you would look for opportunities, or the opportunities would find you, and you get a call from the European Data Protection Supervisor's Office, or you get a call from the European Parliament or the Economic and Social Committee, and saying, we need you to work for us because we see you're on the reserve list, you are eligible, you've gone through this excruciating sequence of tests, and we'd be happy to employ you. So that's when you decide whether that's the right thing for you. Hopefully it is. and that's when you can be hired. Reservists have a validity, typically 1 year, but for this kind of specialist competitions, it's often longer. So it could be 2 or 3 years, or it's open-ended, saying until we run a similar competition again. The reserve list remains open and you can be hired. How to get the job. Now, before I go there, I see there are many questions that have come in since. So let me quickly try to catch up on these. So I worked as a function group 2 in data protection. I have certificates saying that. In the frame of my functions, the commission or at the commission, I had to deal with data protection projects. How do I demonstrate that in supporting documents? Well, if you work in data protection, I presume that's good enough. I mean, if these keywords appear in that certificate or that employment slip, I don't think you need to demonstrate anything beyond that. And again, as long as you have 3 years and the right or some official qualification as a degree of 3 years, you should be fine and set. How will our experience be checked by EPSO? I'm not referring to the requirement of minimum 3 years, but minor issues like the kind of tasks that we are used to do as data protection lawyers, client or projects. Bound by confidentiality agreements. So again, if you have the general framework that there's a substantive part of your job was about data protection, that should be good enough for you to be eligible. Again, you probably need to demonstrate that with a certificate or any at the minimum a declaration on honor that you actually did that. Again, as a minimum, if there's no other resources available. But that's when the true test really comes in through the competition, through the exam. So they will ask you about projects and your knowledge and the field-related interview and the multiple choice tests and all the rest, which again is not strictly about your formal qualifications. It's about what you actually know. So those could be 2 separate things, but it is tested. Obviously, confidentiality agreements, you're not going to talk about anything that might breach it. It's really about what you know about the subject. They're not going to ask you, like in the talent screener, which this particular competition does not have, where they would say, can you give an example when when did you work on this particular issue? And you say, well, I can't say that because I'm bound by confidentiality agreements. But you say, well, I worked on this issue and here's what I know about this issue. I don't know if that answers the question, but if not, then feel free to follow up and I'll try to give a more specific answer. Right, field-related computer-based tests. So the pre-selection test, as I understand. Are there any specific resources you recommend to review apart from Gdpr and the websites of EU institutions? Yeah, so on very first glance, obviously Gdpr is the Bible that you need to know inside out. I would probably look at the European Data Protection Supervisor's website very carefully. A resource I often recommend in general terms, but again, in this case as well, are annual reports. You probably want to look at the Data Protection Supervisor's annual report. I'm pretty sure they have one, maybe multiple ones from past years, where you get a sense of the kind of things they deal with, the kind of challenges or issues they have dealt with. There are certainly other resources on this particular subject by other institutions. One interesting resource actually comes to mind. All European Commission, there you go, the dog. All European Commission directorates, so all the DGs have annual reports, but management reports. And maybe DG HR or security has something that's related to data protection. Maybe the internal audit service has certain sections on data protection. So you could dig a little deeper. I'm sure that the European Parliament, some of their committees have issues linked to data protection. And maybe the European Parliament's research service has some reports or interesting resources on data protection. So these would come as first ideas. I would certainly, obviously, start Googling around in the EU context, what else could come up. And I would encourage you to look at other data protection international bodies or organizations. So the International Association of Privacy Professionals, so IAPP, I think that's how they are abbreviated. I'm pretty sure they have a wealth of resources. So these are stuff that you can check out and look at the kind of information they put out there. And again, I mean, it's vast. Obviously, it's vast, but hopefully this can help you in your preparation. All right, maybe one more question before I move on, or one or two. Not clear difference between situational competency-based interview and field-related interview. Can you please explain? So there's a big difference. So the SCBI, the situational competency-based interview, basically has nothing to do with data protection. It has to do with how you would act or react in a given professional situation. So it has nothing to do with the particularities of the competition. It's really about your competencies. How would you work with team members? How would you resolve a conflict? How would you make sure that a deadline is respected despite certain challenges? So all of it is about your competencies. Whereas on the other side, the field-related interview is really about your professional knowledge and the application of your professional knowledge in data protection. So how do you make sure, how do you use the rules that you're aware of? What is the application of the data protection and related rules in a specific context? So these are quite different. So if I really want to simplify it, I'd say one is how you work and the other one is what you know. So quite different. All right, and perhaps one more. I was told it's possible that all test stages take 1 day. Do you consider it possible? It will be at least 2 or 3 effectively different dates. Hard to tell, because the case study in the assessment center is sometimes organized separately for logistical reasons. So you might need to do that either online or in a Prometric test center on a computer. So that might be on a separate day, whereas the actual interview might take place on another day. So it's not a given that all of this happens on a single day. It also depends whether it's rather in person or pretty much online. And again, if it's online, they might organize it in a way that you have a case study on a computer and a couple hours later, the situational competency-based interview, then the field interview, and then maybe the abstract verbal numerical reasoning test on a separate day. So hard to tell at this point, but everything will be communicated to you in due course, and you do have time to plan and at least a month just to get your head around how to organize your time and your day. All right, I know there are a couple of other questions. I'll do my best to come back to those. But just a couple of hints, a couple of ideas how to prepare for this is practice. Take practice seriously and practice for several weeks. Make sure that you have others who motivate you. You might want to do a study group and you do it regularly. It's a bit like a sports preparation where you cannot just get your technique and your muscles ready a week before a competition. You need to do that on a regular basis. And there is methodology. So make sure that you're aware of how to quickly resolve an abstract reasoning test. What is the situational competency-based interview? How can you improve your skills? How can you express yourself in a clearer way so your scores will presumably be higher as well? Persistence is so important because this is a long process, might take several months, it's likely going to take several months. So do not give up and just keep going, and especially if it looks a little hopeless, it's not. It's just you need to stick to it. And then doing lots of simulations with a colleague, with one of our coaches, online. There are many ways where you can practice these things. So we're here to help you, and you can get into the practice mode or exam mode and simulate the test. As I said, we have the verbal reasoning now in 24 languages, and numerical reasoning, abstract reasoning, case study simulations, SCBI workshops. We have 2 and soon 3 amazing coaches and trainers who are there to assist you. And again, we provide information free of charge at any time if you send us a message or point you to resources that can be helpful, along with webinars and along with different resources like ebooks and demo tests and training sessions. We try to cover the whole spectrum of preparation. And if you're on Facebook, you might want to join. There's a dedicated group where rumors, information, updates, and ideas can be shared. You might want to check out one of my books with the Assessment Center or the Administrator exams. Pretty much here, it's a blend of these two, because the yellow cover book has more specific verbal, abstract, numerical reasoning tests, and the Assessment Center really focuses on other parts of the Assessment Center. I leave this on the screen while I check other questions. This is a special discount offer. It's valid for 2 days. You're welcome to use it. You might want to share with others if you think they could benefit. So this is for everyone to have. So let's see what other questions may be of interest in the next 4 minutes before our time is up. So any idea how long the whole procedure will take, like from the 12th of next month to the last test? So as I said before, several months. Usually the benchmark is around 9 months. So if you do the maths, when would that be? So roughly next summer. Oof, that's quite some time. Or let's say late spring. Though in some cases they might speed up the process or try to really push it. Until now, there were a lot of uncertainties as the transition from the in-person test to the online testing happened because of COVID. But now those systems and those practices are more in place. So that probably has a positive impact on the competition cycle. But then again, to be realistic, anything between 6 to 9 months. Motivations and strengths look very much like a short version of talent screener. Not much about this part of the application in the notice. When would those answers be assessed? Honestly, I'm not even sure that they will be assessed at all. So it might be, it's a kind of question that you need to fill in. They might look at it at one point, perhaps already in the very end after you are on the reserve list and they are looking to hire you, and they say, okay, so what is this person's motivation to actually work in this field? So that might have some bearing in actual at the employment or recruitment part. In terms of its impact on your application, probably not much. Again, with the caveat that I might be wrong, but it's often it's a kind of question that it's part of your application profile or the things you need to fill in. You certainly are not going to write there some nonsense. You want to make sure you fill it in properly, but it's not translated into a score. So they're not going to say, okay, this person looks very motivated, 10 points, or this person just wrote in whatever, minus 10 points. This is not going to happen. So fill it in as you would, but it probably won't be evaluated in points. All right. Do we need to get certification from former current employer stating that we did data protection? How specific does it need to be? Which documents from who? Could we just provide a general contract? Again, it depends on the application form, which I haven't seen yet. So there they would probably ask you more details when you worked in data protection and from which date to which date, what was the job profile. And you need to be ready to provide evidence. So chances are they will not ask you those pieces of evidence, but they have the right to do so. So if they were to ask it, you need to be able to provide it. And to what degree, how detailed? Well, let's say if you were a civil servant in Spain, where you dealt with data protection, but your official employment record says whatever administrative system you have in Spain, taking EPSO as an analogy, I was an 85 civil servant in the municipality of Madrid, and I dealt with legal matters. Well, yes, great, but data protection would ideally need to be listed somewhere as part of your responsibilities. So in short, as far as I know, you will not necessarily need to provide all of these certificates, but you need to be ready to offer this. From a formal employment side, so that you have 3 years of work experience, you absolutely need to prove that. So you, at the minimum, when you get hired and you need to fill into or give it to the HR department, those certificates that, okay, that's when I have had formal employment. But then again, I say it with a bit of like asterisk and a footnote that they might ask you for it. So already in the course of the application, to say, okay, attach this particular certificate already at this point. So again, I know this is a very, very loose answer for the question, because I don't have specific information on to what degree they provided. But again, be ready, be prepared to have that kind of certificate. You don't necessarily need to request these documents already now. Start filling in the application, see what information is being asked of you until the 12th of October, and then they will let you know in due course if they need more. I have an older version of the book. I presume you mean the Ultimate EU Test Book. Did you update it a lot this year? Well, this year we didn't update it. The latest is 2020, the latest edition, depending on which edition you have. So if you have a year before, 2 years before, there are usually not huge changes. Usually 20-30% of the content would change. But if you have much earlier versions, then it probably has already become something quite different from the copy you have. If you mean the assessment center, again, in the past 2 to 3 years, we've done some updates, usually to reflect whatever happened at EPSO with the online testing. Again, these are not substantive in terms of the number of pages, but obviously very important in their practical application of how they run the online tests versus the in-person tests. All right, and before we close off, when is the job experience checked by EPSO in this competition? And the job experience, so it will be checked after the field multiple choice test. And again, the length is what they are probably gonna check. All right, so that's it. If there's any question I may have missed, we'll try to follow up with you shortly. And I thank you so much for your participation, and hopefully this gives you some guidance on how to run or how to prepare for the competition. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. We have our email up there. My colleagues are ready to help you, and wishing you lots of luck in this competition. Please take it seriously. There's going to be a fierce competition, and don't share your passwords with anyone. You know that already. Pay attention to data protection and protect that even further when you are an EU official in this field. So thank you so much for your time. A big thanks to Lenka and Veronica for helping with the webinar and making sure that this ran so smoothly. And thanks for my kids who were calm enough not to interrupt. All right, have a nice day. Bye-bye.